Greetings and welcome to the Upper Pen podcast. My name is Dakota, and today I'm talking with Cale Plamann about his Blessed Time Lit RPG series. Blessed Time's premise is what caught my eye this time. Micah, the main character, lives in a world where there are blessed people who can access character sheets, use magic, and do all the things I go to D&D for. And then there are the unblessed, like Micah's mother, who can get taken advantage of because they can't access their character sheet and are just everyday non-magical folks. This series also has a fun Groundhog Day vibe with Micah's gift, allowing him to travel back in time. Cale, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
So how did you get started on Blessed Time?
So Blessed Time of all of my series probably has actually the most interesting story behind how it happened. And interesting isn't necessarily a positive thing, but I have medication that I have to take, and I actually took two of them rather than one because I had forgotten that I had taken one. And I have a thyroid problem, which is the medication in question. And if you're hypothyroid and you take two, you functionally go into a manic state. And I more or less had an 8-hour-long panic attack during which I functionally plotted out the entirety of the first two books and wrote the first story arc of the first book, all while just basically like hyperventilating and rocking back and forth. And if people are wondering, I've gotten some critiques where people are like, well, especially compared to your other stuff, it's awfully dark. And I'm like, oh no, this came from an incredibly dark place. Like you're correct. This is probably the darkest thing you're ever going to read from me. But yeah.
Your panic attacks are much more productive than mine are. You got two books out of it.
Yeah, on one hand, it was good. On the other hand, I am very careful to make sure I don't repeat that experience because as interesting the series is, and as much as I liked writing the series that like spawned out of this, I would prefer to never experience that again.
Yeah. Don't ever do that again. I like that seems too rough. I'm really paranoid about my synthroid, so like I try hard to not ever take too much.
Yeah. No, I've done it twice with the same result both times, and but that's like twice in about a decade because I'm pretty careful not to do it after having done it twice.
Yeah, I hope I never do that, but. So tell me a little bit about how the blessed versus the non-blessed work in this series.
Sure. So part of what happens with me when I write is I always want to have some sort of sociological or economic question that I explore while I'm writing. And one thing I always say to other writers is that world building is for authors. So it's usually in the background. There's enough there that if you're looking for it, you'll find it. But I recognize that as much as I like the economics of my world, most of my readers are there for, the magic, the spheres, and the leveling up. So I'll focus on that for them. But I mean, there's some hint of it with like the prologue of the first book functionally being an econ textbook. But the general idea is that the currency is functionally your mana pool, like what increases your mana pool is the currency. And if you don't have a character sheet, you can't see the size of your mana pool. So you literally don't know how much money you have. And it leads to people getting cheated, not, agreeing to a trade for 1 point of moon mana and, ending up getting like 1/2, those sorts of things. So I really tried to make it into sort of an underclass, not quite like an untouchable situation, but kind of the people use the fact that these folks are disadvantaged as an excuse to discriminate against them. And they really are disadvantaged. It's not something where like society's imagining it. They genuinely are at a disadvantage because, I mean, the books are focusing on blessings that are related to combat because that's what people want to read about. But like Micah's dad had the blessing related to being a tailor. And that's kind of how it is a lot of the industry and labor and all of that, you're going to have a blessing that makes it so you don't get tired as easily if you're a manual laborer. You might get a blessing that allows you to do math quicker in your head if you're, an engineer or an architect. And even if you can't count the money the way that the unblessed do, it kind of creates this dynamic where you just have people that, due to the magic, they're better off than other people. And so you have like your class structure where I have your traditional nobility, but also there's this kind of class structure where literally you have character classes versus other people who don't have character classes. And I tried to explore, while recognizing that it isn't something that people were super interested in, I wanted to explore that dynamic between, how part of the world being magic and part of the world being mundane would actually impact people.
I thought that was like the thing that got me going on this. I read the prologue and I was like, I'm going to buy the audiobook right now. I bought the ebook and I need the audiobook. And then Neil Helgers was the narrator. Yeah. And I was like, you got me. But I love your subtle world building in it. So it's not just with these class systems, but it's also like the different types of guilds or how people are friends with each other. The big guy whose name I can never remember, who's
correct.
Yeah. Okay. He, like him being from a different or partially a different race, right? Like those things all add up to a really kind of rich world here.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of what it is like, I always spend a significant amount of time world building before I do a series, and it's not always going to make it into the book. But what I found is, even if I don't put the whole puzzle assembled in front of the reader, I need to know how the pieces fit together in the back of my head, or it starts to feel a little slapped together. I have other series where I followed the rule of cool, and I liked how they turned out, but it was just kind of one of those things where like, it always felt like I was putting things together at the last minute. And the stuff that I write these days, I usually have because I'm a weirdo, I use Google Drive, right? So I use the Excel version of that, and that's what I do all my world building in. And I just have tabs where I have magic system, 80%, 90% of the spells that there are going to be, locations, all of that, where I want all of that written down. And I can tell you that in like some of those stories, I might have used 4 of the 20 locations, but I have this like political struggle between these things that are happening in the background. Like it's developing off camera, and it might never make it onto camera, but at the same time, me actually knowing how everything worked, I just feel like the book would come out incomplete. It might not be something that the reader could put their finger on. It would just feel half baked if I didn't put everything into it and actually know what's going on behind the scenes. And so that's kind of what I was trying to do, is like I had Basil's Cove sketched out in much greater detail than anyone will ever see. But having how these guilds are interacting, how they're interacting with the dungeons and all of that, knowing how that all worked means that when I put references to it, hints of it, the world feels more real, more lived in than just me, making things up and throwing them at the wall, which I certainly have done that as well. I just don't like doing it.
It reminds me a lot of, do you know who Mark Lawrence is?
I do not.
So he wrote this series called The Book of the Ancestor. It's actually many series that are all connected, but he has like an entire folklore system that I'm betting he has some journal of just story after story after story, and he just picks the right one for the moments. And that's kind of what it feels like you do, is maybe you just pull what you need.
Yeah, no, I mean, part of what it is I also just have these creative bursts where I can't stop myself from making things. And ironically, actually, before I started writing, what it would be is homebrew RPGs.
Oh, yeah.
So there I could do I would design the system for like what my players would be doing. I designed the world for it. And for every like 4 or 5 of them I'd make, I could actually trick players into playing one of them. And that's kind of what it is. I just have this like repository of ideas, because over the years I've created, so many different settings and so many different worlds that most of them never actually made it onto a page anywhere. And so that's kind of how it is. Like, I do that where I imagine how they interconnect, but I also just have kind of this like encyclopedia of new ideas of things that I just run out of time to write, but I have so many things I want to write.
I found that I'm not very good at writing like fantasy or lit RPG or anything like that, because I just want to focus on the world building. And I know that's not what people come there for.
Oh, the hardest part is genuinely reining yourself in. Like, because I want to nerd out and I want to write 2-3 chapters on how things work. Like the other series that I have out right now, Viceroy's Pride, I spent so much time on cosmology and orbital dynamics in the first book, because it's about a moon that circles around a gas giant. And it's just one of those things where like I spent so long on that, but also at the end of the day, it's like I can think of maybe 3 of all of my readers that actually want to know about how this moon is tidally locked and how having like a dual star system plays into this. It's just like, but yeah, that's the problem. That's what I want to do. I want to write, 10,000 words of that, and I guess we can have a sword fight at the end.
I'm with you on this. You ever want to put out those deleted scenes, is what I'll call them, I'll read them. So the other really cool thing about this series in particular is it really does have a Groundhog's Day feel to it, where Micah can travel back in time, but with some caveats, right? So he can't keep any of his classes. He can't keep any of his skills other than the knowledge he's learned, right?
Correct. So like skill levels stay with, because that's functionally knowledge, but spells, anything else that is sort of like an achievement, like a tangible building up, goes away. It's just everything in here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how the time mechanics work for your series.
Okay, so one of the things is I'm a very good-natured person, but I also I think the best way to describe what I do is spite-based writing. And I was talking with someone in a Discord server for authors, and one of the things he kept saying is the quickest way to kill a series is to introduce time travel, because it just blows up the power curve. And he kept saying that. He kept saying, I will never touch anything with time travel, and that time travel is awful. And so sort of to spite this guy who, again, it's not like I dislike him or anything, but sort of just to respond to that almost as like a thought experiment, I try to think of how could I do time travel in a way that wouldn't completely blow everything up, while also kind of exploring the side effects of it. And so that's how I came up with the idea of doing a 5-year loop, with there also being a 5-year cooldown on it. So the idea is, he loses everything, but also if you make it to 3 years and you're backed into a corner and you're screwed, too bad, so sad, I guess you just die. And it's also not something like Grade Zero, which I love, by the way, where you die and you go back. I wanted the time travel to be something where it would allow you to redo it, it would allow you to get more powerful, but there would also be tangible reasons why you wouldn't want to loop indefinitely. And in addition to that, I wanted to limit its applicability. And that reminds me of something my dad used to say when I was like talking to him about all the fantasy novels I was reading, is he said, well, you have to be careful with magic, because magic just means that anything is possible. And that kind of brings you back to, you really need to put boundaries and limits on your magic, because if you have unlimited magic and time travel, holy crap, can you break a series with time travel if you really want to. And so I had to try and find ways to keep some sort of dynamic difficulty and tension in it, while also making time be the main focus of the series.
I thought you did it really well, because normally I would not keep reading something that was like, we have to go back and start over. But I think the way you did it, like, you don't just go back to the very beginning. You go back to a certain point 5 years before, right? And then he can gather up different techniques. And the fact that you don't do it 20 times in one book is really nice.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the readers wanted me to, but like one of the first things I thought when I was writing this is, I have to make sure that I'm not redoing the same scenes over and over and over again. You can have one or two of the same scenes as sort of touchstones to kind of be your coda, where you're saying, this is what I'm going back to, this is where I'm repeating to. But if I have the same training montage with slight increases in power, like 4 or 5 times, even if the readers think they want that, they don't actually want that. That's going to get boring.
Yeah. So I thought it was really well done. And then, so between books 2 and 3, he actually, he leaves, and it kind of is like a turning point for the series, really. Can you tell me a little bit about that shift?
Sure. So initially through book 2 was the end of the series. And then I liked it. I liked it enough. I liked when people were coming back to me enough that I wanted to return to it. But the problem is that the Basil's Cove story was pretty necessarily run out. Like there were enough enemies there that Micah needed to leave. And, I'm not going to go too much into that because, people might not have read it yet. But obviously, in order to succeed in his task, he had to burn some bridges, and he burned many bridges. And so there's a time skip, and he moved somewhere else. And I wanted to also make sure that time was still a major part of the story. But at the same time, I'm running into this thing where if I keep doing 5-year loops, he is going to get obscenely powerful. Like, it is going to get absolutely out of control. There are already power scaling issues. And don't get me wrong, I love, Chinese fiction. I love the genre and all of that. But I didn't want this to turn into a series where every 2 books I have to have him ascend to another realm to kill like another, you kill God, and then you kill Mega God, and then you kill Ultra Mega God, right? And I like that. It just wasn't what I had envisioned for this. And so I think there's enough room for what I did, which is you move to a new place, you have a similar but not quite the same mechanic, and you have a new power scale that has a much higher upper boundary. But it's going to be a 4-book series. The next book is going to be, I think it's set up pretty clearly that way. The next book is going to finish it off. And it's almost really 2 duologies, actually. Like, because the Basil's Cove is Basil's Cove. And then the Decora's Legacy series is Decora's Legacy.
I like that as that one that you have a termination period, that there is an ending, but also that thinking of it like a duology, because they are not, it's the same character, but he's in different points, right? Yeah. So it seems much saner to think of them as 2 different duologies.
And maybe I should have been clearer with that to readers, but that's very much how I meant to write it. It's the same character, but like, he's in a different country, different life circumstances, 5-10 years later, like everything is different and has progressed. And it's still going to be a story. It's still going to be the same characters. There's no major changes to personalities or anything like that. But yeah, 2 duologies.
Yeah. Well, it works well. So, keep doing what you're doing. So that kind of brings up the idea of publishing for me. So you're published with Aethon Books for the Blessed Time series, right?
Correct.
And then for your Viceroy's, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Viceroy's Pride, it's Mountaindale Press.
Correct.
So how did you get hooked up with those 2 rather small lit RPG or fantasy?
Well, they're also both going to be getting second series too. So I really like both Rhett and Dakota, Rhett from Aethon and Dakota from Mountaindale. They're great people. They're fun to work with. They know their craft. But like what was happening with me is I was originally writing on Royal Road, and I had some success on Royal Road. I was enjoying writing. I was producing a whole lot because thanks to COVID, I had a lot of time at home. And so I was trying to think of, what are the next steps here? And I sent out query letters to a bunch of places, originally actually for Viceroy's Pride, because that had been completed as a trilogy. way before anything else, right? And Aethon was actually one of the places I queried, and they said yes to me, but I also got a yes from Dakota. And I was trying to think, how do I try and both break into the market, because like Royal Road is so different from publishing on Amazon. How do I break in, but also how do I try and make sure I have as wide of an appeal as possible? And there's a fair amount of crossover, but one thing I really have noticed is that lit RPG readership, you have a whole bunch of different like areas. Like you have the people who are in the Facebook communities, you have the people who are in the Reddit communities, you have the Royal Road people who occasionally go to Amazon, but not all that often. You have the Discord communities, and they're all, there's some overlap, but a lot of the time they're kind of separate. And as I was looking at how both Aethon and Mountaindale were approaching things, some did better in some places, some did better in others. And I figured I have enough series coming out here that it would make sense for me to spread it a little bit wider, where I can go with one reader base for this, another reader base for this, and hope that if someone likes one of my books, they read over into the other series, and that I can get enough cross-pollination from, spreading myself wide, that hopefully people will start liking my book and reading them regardless of where I publish them.
What's funny is so I'm part of the Mountaindale street team or whatever they call their advanced readers. And I saw Viceroy's Pride, like number 2, I think, come up as something that you can read and review before it comes out. And I was like, oh, well, I haven't read the first one yet. And then I found Blessed Time and I was like, well, now I have to read it. So I think splitting them like that does make sense though, because they do feel different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things is you're going to get a lot more of my science, fantasy, and Magitech over at Mountaindale. And I don't know why I made this division. I just did. It might have been a coin flip, right? But the next series coming out via Mountaindale is going to be sort of magic mixed with aliens mixed with cyberpunk. Yeah, no, I'm pretty. It's one of my favorites. And then I'm doing something that's more fantasy. Kind of with its own twist. I have a non-human main character, and that's one that's coming out with Aethon. And so, I don't know. I'm trying to I basically am trying to go to the various publishing houses where I know people, I trust people, they've treated me well, I like them, but I'm also trying to keep it wide enough that hopefully I'm getting twice as much audience as I would with one, 15 book series or something.
I think that Aethon does a really good job of pushing email notifications, but then like Dakota and Danielle do a really good job of being on top of Facebook and like being on social media.
Oh no, the social media, the street team stuff, everything that they've done for like reader interaction over at Mountaindale, I really like. So like one of the things that I find interesting is that Aethon, although it's kind of new in lit RPG, they've been doing a lot of stuff in like science fiction, like military science fiction and those sorts of things for a while now. And so they have a lot of these more general market indie marketing tricks and like groups that they work with. And so they're good, but they're not quite as focused on lit RPG as Mountaindale is. And I really do think that, they're both huge markets and both teams are very good at something. It's just that, they're separate enough in what they're good at that I don't know. I think I made the right choice to do both, and I really like both teams.
I think it works. And then you spread some love and everybody gets love. How did you decide to go with publishing with one of these companies versus just self-publishing on Amazon?
That was actually a fair amount of debate for me. I know a lot of people who are just flat out self-publishers, and they do fairly well and they know what they're doing. My problem is that I have a 40-hour plus a week day job. So I really don't have the time outside of writing to stay on top of marketing metrics, stay on top of some of the networking stuff. I still do a fair amount of, networking, and I'm, in and out of the Reddit here and there. I'm in and out of Discords here and there. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into going full self-publish. And sure, you might get more, more royalties out of it, but it's because you're doing more work. And having people who have a lot of experience, who know what they're doing, who have history doing this, who have a track record of success, I might get more money if I reinvent the wheel, but also why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, and with like Mountaindale Press, I know Dakota's pretty author focused. Like,
yeah.
So
I mean, what I always tell people is, if they're new authors, is you can publish on your own. I like to suggest to people going with a hybrid press, like either Mountaindale or Aethon, for their first book or two. If they feel like they're on top of things enough after their first trilogy to go out on their own, good for you. I just generally think that for your first series, you should be working in partnership with someone who absolutely knows what they're doing before you try it on your own. And, feel free to disagree with me, people. Feel free to do it on your own. That's just my 2 cents.
I do notice that, like, people who publish with these smaller houses for Lit RPG or Game Lit, they don't have the same problems that Dakota had when he first started, where he's like, I couldn't get like a good cover artist, and I didn't know how to start even pushing the fact that I had a book, right? So like, that must be nice to not have to worry about those.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I feel like I was about halfway to being able to self-publish by the time I started looking at Mountaindale and Aethon, because again, I was talking to a lot of indie, mostly Lit RPG authors, but a couple like, dark fantasy authors and stuff like that. But really what it came down to, and this is just because Lit RPG appeals to me because I'm very numbers oriented person, and I want things to be in logical black and white. But my issue is I didn't know how to put together a marketing budget. I knew that marketing budgets were essential. I had ideas on how to commission covers, and it was a headache when dealing with cover artists, because the problem is a lot of times people will use brushes that are non-commercial rights only, and they won't even know it. So you'll have these people who are just kind of, they're hobby artists, they're selling portraits and all of that, but at the point where they use a brush that is copyrighted for commercial use, but legal for personal use, and suddenly, someone's coming back on me for the cover, like, it was just an absolute headache to figure all of that out. But I figured most of that out, and I was, pushing myself on Royal Road without, much outside support. But it really just came down to, how much am I paying per impression on Amazon? How do I make sure that I am recouping money on these pay per impression? How does all of that work? How do I optimize this so I don't, make X money on the book, but spend X plus 1 money on marketing the book? And that's what terrified me, is I had no experience with actually knowing the dollars and cents of how to make it work without accidentally overspending or underspending on marketing, because I've seen both. I've seen people with books that do well, but they don't make much money because they poured a ton of money into marketing. And I've seen people with books that I think are just these absolute gems, but that they never got any traction. And they're, once you make it past the 1 month point, if you don't get traction, the book's basically done.
So you mentioned that this isn't your day job, right?
Yes.
What is your day job?
I'm an attorney. You would actually be surprised. There are quite a few attorneys writing in science fiction, fantasy, indie stuff. I know a couple in Lit RPG, like a couple of the bigger names too. And it's one of these things where I actually started creative writing because I realized at some point that I've been writing so many briefs that I could no longer write in an interesting way. Everything was coming out very dry and exact. The descriptions were very precise, but they were a paragraph long. And it's just like, I wanted to get that skill back because I had done a little bit of creative writing in, high school and college, and I just never had gotten the time for it. So I started doing NaNoWriMo's, National Novel Writing Month. It's basically just a thought exercise for me to teach myself how to write creatively again. And then, I don't know, I just kept doing it.
Is there any plan to eventually make writing your full-time job?
My goal, if this works out well, is to switch to basically still probably doing about 20 hours a week of law, mostly in fields that I enjoy more. Because the fields that pay well and the fields that are fun are almost never the same. So I want to still do it because I, paid a lot for this license, and I still want to, be doing the things that I think are benefiting people and, and helping society move forward. But if I could spend most of each week writing, I would love it. I mean, writing can be a chore at times because anything can be, but it's so much more fun than basically anything else I've done professionally.
So that kind of brings up this idea of how do you have time for any of these? Because you did 2 books for the beginning of the beginning of this year, 2 books for the end of last year, it seemed like.
Well, the dirty secret is they're pre-written, but they're also pre-written at a rate where the publication rate isn't that far off. So Viceroy's Pride was written from December 1st, 2019 until about the end of 2020, I think. It was something. It might be 1 year later than that, because I've only been doing this for like 2 years. But that was one where I just did a 2,000 word chapter a day for like 3-4 months straight, and that gets you well into the 3rd book in 3 months.
Well, okay. Did you find it hard to figure out like a work writing balance when you first started?
Yes. The answer is that I didn't sleep a whole lot. I wrote a lot, was getting about 6 hours of sleep a night, and I was writing a little faster then because I don't feel I was writing quite as purposefully as I am now. Like there's a little bit more thought per word that goes into it now. But some of the stuff like Tower of Somnus, the next series that's coming out through Mountaindale, that first book was about 500 pages and written in like a month. And that's something that I'm probably never going to do again, but I just wanted to see if I could do 120,000 words in a 1 month period. And the answer is I can, but a lot of the chapters were finished at like 4 a.m. And then I would go to work at 8 a.m. the next day and just, have coffee until my hands shook.
Yes. Just mix some Synthroid and a lot of coffee in the morning. That's an incredibly tight schedule, though. I always worry about lit RPG authors feeling like they're pressured to get the next book out. Is that how you feel? Like you have to keep producing and producing?
Yeah, that is definitely how I feel. So my thing is that I don't have an ADD diagnosis, but I feel like I probably have it. I struggle to stay on one series for too long. And so what my ideal is about 2 series at a time, where like I alternate chapters, where I might do like 3 chapters for one week, 4 chapters for another the next week, something like that. I'm not a big fan of what I'm doing right now, which is 3 series at once. But 2 series at once is about perfect for me. But the problem with that is that it doesn't go super fast. And again, I mean, compared to literary fiction, I'm blazing. I'm going super fast compared to like, literary fiction or general fantasy. Like, unless your name is Brandon Sanderson, I'm probably outwriting you in general fantasy. But in lit RPG terms, I'm pretty slow. Just because, everyone expects to have a new 600-page book every 3 months. But I mean, all I can do is write as fast as I can. And, if I'm sick and the words aren't there, my rule is I like to always get 500 words down a day. I try and write more than that, But if I can get 500 words down a day and it's just chugging at the end of it, I'll call it a day. But the rule is you write every day unless you're on vacation, and you have a floor of 500 words. And that's how I've been progressing so far. Maybe it isn't fast enough, but it's as fast as my body can take at this point. So it's what I'm doing.
I think lit RPG authors put way too much pressure on themselves. Like, I will wait for you, I promise. Also, I need time to be able to read all the books.
Yeah, no, I mean, plenty of people will wait, and well, I think everyone will, but like plenty of people are fine with it. But like, there's nothing like you finish a trilogy, you sit down, and then the first review is, "That's great, where's book 4?" Which is exactly what happened to me with Viceroy. And I'm like, oh my God, that series was something like 6 to 8 months of my life, followed by another like 2 to 3 months of editing, because there were like multiple rounds, and I really had to fix a lot of like continuity stuff, from the rough draft. And I'm just like for me, a 2,000 word chapter is probably about 3 to 4 hours. And an average middle of the road length book is about 100,000 words. So when you're looking at your rough drafts, for me, you're looking at roughly 150 hours for the rough draft, and then you're probably looking at like a third that for editing. And so that's like 200 words. That's if your day job was like 5 weeks. And then, and don't get me wrong, I'm a voracious reader too. So I read a book in like, 5-6 hours as well. But there's just something about like being like, that was literally a month of full-time work, and you read it in 5 hours. Oh my God.
I couldn't even imagine like getting the reviews. Oh,
No, I'm just like, don't worry, you'll get a 4th book, but give me a second.
I want to go have dinner before I write it, Well, okay. I don't know what to say, because people love lit RPG so much. They're literally reading anything. And then like they're waiting for their favorites to keep coming. And I see on all these Facebook groups, like, keep pushing books. When's the next one? And I'm like, it's only been a few weeks since the last one.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things where like, I don't know if readers realize how slow it is to write books. And like, my thing is that like, again, I think objectively I'm writing them pretty fast, but by lit RPG terms, I'm probably like, a C- on speed. But like, there's just so much that goes into them where you have to write for so long that, I mean, I know authors who can do, maybe not consistently, but can do like 10,000 word days. And I'm just like, but that just isn't in the cards for me. Like, that just isn't how I write. And there's just so much that goes into it, and like, more power to the people. If you can get a full novel, written in 3 weeks and then edited in another 3 weeks, more power to you, God bless. But for the rest of us, it's just like, you can shout at me all you want, but like, my hands hurt. They can't type anymore.
And then they tell you to get dictators. Oh. So what are the 2 series that are coming out later? So there's the one for Mountaindale.
Yeah, the one for Mountaindale is Tower of Somnus, which is kind of a mashup of everything sci-fi I liked at once. So it's like sort of VR MMO mixed with cyberpunk, mixed with aliens, mixed with magic. So yeah, that'll narrow it down for you. And then the other series is called 1001 Ascensions. If you follow me on Royal Road, the first book is A Dream of Wings and Flame, and I think that should be finishing up. I mean, I'm done with it. I set all the chapters on auto-publish, so it should probably be finishing up on Royal Road in like the next couple of weeks here. But that's book 1 of that, and it's basically about a kobold sorcerer who is absolutely convinced that he's a dragon. And there's a lot of like sort of like cute funsy stuff, but at the same time, when it comes to becoming a dragon, he's very sort of like brutal, and I will do what I need to become a dragon, interspersed with like people holding each other's tails.
So he's a kobold who's also adorable.
Yes. There's definitely attempts to go for cuteness, but it's also interspersed with, like kobold Machiavellian behavior.
Now I'm going to have to buy both of them. Thanks. You're going to be the reason I'm broke soon. Well, thank you, Cale, for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah.
And if you haven't checked out Blessed Time or Viceroy's Pride, you got to do it. You want to. As always, thanks for listening and have a great day. Bye.